Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's SAFE event, America's Energy Challenge from Crisis to Opportunity. I'm Jeb Nadaner, Executive Director of SAFE Commanding Heights. At SAFE, we're working to advance transformative transportation energy technologies and critical supply chains to enhance our national security. And today, the intersection between economics and national security has never been greater for the energy supply chain. The ongoing war in Ukraine and the corresponding energy price spikes have reminded us again of the risks of being overly reliant on a single fuel source for transportation, a source whose supply and price can be affected by nations that do not share U.S. interests or U.S. values. We are delighted today to have an esteemed group of panelists to discuss the immediate policy options and longer-term solutions to address the persistent energy challenges we face as a nation. We hope you'll enjoy the event, and many thanks to our panel and to our audience members for joining us. And with that, I hand this over to today's moderator, SAFE's founder and CEO, Robbie Diamond.
Thank you very much, Jeb. Thanks for all the work you do and your team's work at our Commanding Heights initiative at SAFE. For those who join our webinars, we were founded in 2004, kind of for precisely this moment, how to end oil dependence for economic and national security. And sadly, every five years or so, we have the tyrants and dictators of the world just reminding us how since 1973 and the first oil OPEC embargo, we've really done very little, but thankfully all the technology is now here today to solve this problem. With that, because we have Congressman Crow with us, who, as usual, our congressional guests always have votes, so we'll try to move very swiftly. Let me quickly introduce everyone. We have Bob McNally, who is a 29-year expert in oil markets, government, and market experience. He has a great book called Crude Volatility, the History and the Future of Boom and Bust Cycles, Oil Prices. Definitely get it. As I said, every 5 years, it makes a lot of sense to read. And from 2001 to 2003, he was at the National Security Council, really counting barrels for the US government. I think he likes to call himself the barrel counter in Washington. We also have Admiral Michelle Howard, who joined the U.S. Naval Academy in 1978. She was seven of 1,363 African-American women in her class. She's the first of so many things. It's hard to go through them all, but the first African-American woman to command a ship in 1999, the USS Rushmore, and the first African-American woman to command a Navy battle group, the 2009 Expeditionary Strike Group 2, the first to get a 3 stars, and then of course 4 stars in 2014, the 38th Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Commander of Naval Forces in Europe and Africa, and retired after 35 years in 2017. And she's a member of our Energy Security Leadership Council, a group of 4-star admirals and generals and CEOs who work on our mission to end this oil dependence. And finally, we have Congressman Jason Crow, who's a former Army Ranger and lawyer, most importantly, a former lawyer. He represents Colorado's 6th Congressional District, and he served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he really got involved in politics when he saw the difficulty of getting his own veterans benefits and began to help others get their veterans benefits, and ultimately won Denver's Pro Bono Lawyer of the Year. So thank you all for joining us. Because we have to go to Congressman Crow might have to leave, let me ask you this question. You served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Clearly when I started SAFE, we had 2 hot wars going on. Oil was a proximate cause of both. We have a global war on terror, and I just said, geez, why are we constantly, expending blood and treasure for energy? I wonder if when you were there, were you thinking any of those similar thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Robbie, very much for having me and for the great introduction. Thank you to SAFE for putting this on and doing all the work you've been doing for a very long time and being a steadfast voice. And in your introduction of the other distinguished guests, many of whom have far deeper expertise in this area that I do, but you mentioned Admiral Howard's, maybe one of Admiral Howard's greatest distinctions is that she is a fellow Coloradan as well. So really happy to join my fellow Coloradan and veteran on this panel. Yeah, you know, I've seen this problem from multiple angles. As a member of Congress, somebody who represents 800,000 constituents in Colorado, I see this problem as my constituents are beholden to the whims of autocrats and dictators around the world who decide when to raise the price of oil and when to squeeze Colorado pockets and Americans' pockets at a whim and during a time of great crisis. As a veteran, I saw this issue as well. I saw as supply convoys, fuel convoys were attacked and ambushed because our military was reliant on the fossil fuel tether for our operations. And that problem remains as we try to resupply our forces around Europe, in Asia and Africa, everywhere where we are, how vulnerable that makes us. I mean, we have lost good men and women. We have lost American service members because of our over-reliance on fuel from an operational standpoint in the military. And of course, you see it from a geopolitical standpoint now as we continue to fight for and support the Ukrainian brothers and sisters who are fighting for their freedom on the front lines of democracy right now. And you see how the Russian war machine that's committing terrible atrocities and brutalities is fueled literally and figuratively by Russian energy and Russian oil. And it's time that America and America's allies stop sending money to Vladimir Putin into that war machine. And will have the benefit not only of shutting off that brutality and preventing them from doing what they're doing, but it also will create millions of great paying jobs. And I'll end with this. Prior to the pandemic, the economic sector in Colorado that saw double-digit job growth for 5 consecutive years was the renewable energy sector. We were adding thousands of Colorado jobs in this sector. And our largest public utility provider, Xcel Energy, has stated a goal of 100% renewable energy in the next decade because it's actually cheaper, it's more effective, it's more reliable, and it is better for Colorado paychecks as well, our pocketbooks. So there are just so many reasons why we need to support this, and I'm proud to join the effort.
So you were very early to sponsor the Ban Russian Energy Imports Act. Clearly, as you said, I mean, we see this as sort of blood oil, not just to Russia, but if you look at all the dictators, only 4 out of the top 10 oil producers are from stable democracies. So how do you see, we were releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. How do you see, do you see a role for the Defense Production Act or anything else to sort of refill that? That's something we called on for today.
Yeah, the Defense Production Act, I think, is a unique tool here for the administration. Actually, we saw just last week, the Biden administration invoked the Defense Production Act to ramp up the production of critical rare earth minerals to help with our transition to renewable energy, which I support. And I'm actually proud to be joining and leading a bill with Cori Bush and Senator Sanders, a climate security bill that we're unveiling this week that's going to ask for additional use of the Defense Production Act to secure our supply chain and ramp up production of critical components and supply chain elements so that we can expedite the transition to a renewable energy economy and cut the tether to these autocrats and dictators that are committing terrible atrocities around the world. And it's not just Russia. We shouldn't be buying oil from Iran. We shouldn't be buying it from Venezuela. It is time for America to be independent. And we know in the long term, the absolute best way of doing that is transitioning to clean renewable energy.
Question, just in case you have to go, which is, we did call this from the challenge to the opportunity. So, as you said, we need oil today and we need the transition. And we very much believe the only solution is electrification. Do you believe that we're at a position where we can do both, where we have to produce the energy, the natural gas, the oil today, that the Democrats understand that, and to then convince Republicans that we need to, to transition and somehow bring those two things together as we're here on the precipice of really World War III. Some people believe that's already begun.
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is we have to be doing both right now. We have a short-term problem and we have a long-term problem. And some of my colleagues don't live in the realm of reality, and they're calling for things that are not possible, or they just want our continued reliance on fossil fuels to continue. But the bottom line is we don't yet have the infrastructure needed for electrification. We need to build that. That's going to take time. And we also need the components and the technology to do it as well. So yes, we do have to increase domestic production in the short term, where we are going to have to rely on some of our allies like Mexico and Canada and others to supplement our energy to keep the costs low for consumers. Because half of my constituents live paycheck to paycheck. The price of gas doubles. That's a real problem. People can't afford groceries. So we have to make sure we're addressing that short-term issue. But again, that is the short-term challenge. The long-term opportunity here is create millions of jobs, increase our national security, cut the tether of our reliance on dictators, and actually help the planet as well and address the climate crisis. There are not many things in politics where you get a win, 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 but this is one of them. And it's time that we take advantage of it.
Yeah, you're speaking our playbook since 2004. I said that when I started SAFE, there was a debate, like a beer debate, taste great, less filling, drill more, use less. And ultimately, we need to be doing some in the short term in order to get to the use less or diversify in the long term. And I really hope that we can work with you, not only to produce the energy today, but really accelerate this transition to electrification, but make sure the minerals are, mined, be grown up about that we're going to need these resources, process them, and the precursors before we just as Legos put together in our little battery facilities. I just feel like now's the moment we need to work on this, and we'd love to continue to work with you. Please stay.
We look forward to that as well. I will continue to work with you, but they are calling the other vote now. So I will actually leave you in the expert and far more capable hands of your other panelists, who are tremendous folks. And I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion today.
Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
So now that we've actually solved the energy crisis because we have our first vote, I think we can stop the webinar. No, let me turn to Bob McNally, maybe to set the scene for us from an oil market perspective. I think that would be really helpful.
Thanks so much, Robbie and Jeb and Admiral Howard. And he just left, but Congressman Crow, delighted to be invited back by SAFE and to be in the presence of two distinguished veterans and leaders. I really don't think we can understand where we are today and where we're going next week and next year and next decade, unless we kind of understand the broad trends that got us here. Now, the younger folks out there, say you're in your 20s and your 30s, you may think that it's normal for oil prices to gyrate as wildly as they have in the last 15 years. You may think it's normal to see oil prices nearly quintuple from $30 a barrel to almost 150 from 2003 to 2008. And then everyone thought it was going to be $100 a barrel forever. And OPEC got into a fight with Russia, and suddenly it went down to 26, and then another fight. And in May, it was negative $37 for a while. So, but I would say to you, those of us who are in the upper echelons of age anyway, this is not normal. This is not usual. Normally, you go back to the 1970s, oil prices, typically, if it was like a Disney ride, it's sort of like It's a Small World. There's a little bit of volatility, there's ups and there's downs, but with the exception of the odd war in the Persian Gulf, in which case, yes, we will get spikes, you just don't see the type of volatility that we've seen over the last 15 years. And usually you need recessions to get oil prices to go lower. But when they collapsed in 2015 and 2016, there was no recession. And I think it's really important to understand why oil prices have become much more volatile in the last 20 years than they have been in the last 50. And the answer is the focus of my book, and it's counterintuitive. Because if there's one thing sort of Americans still agree on is, we don't like OPEC. Well, the good news is OPEC has lost control of the oil market for the last 15 years. The bad news is OPEC has lost control of the oil market for the last 15 years. Because what we know from history and the properties of oil, how unresponsive it is on the demand and supply side to price means that if there's not an OPEC, or for the 4 decades before OPEC, the Texas Railroad Commission did this. We were OPEC. OPEC learned its trade from the United States, actually oil producers in Texas. And we learned that if you don't have a group of producers exercising very careful control, strict control over supply, you get these wild boom and bust price swings. And oil, after all, is the lifeblood of modern civilization. Just about all of transportation depends on it. It's not like electricity where we have all kinds of options, renewable, nuclear, coal, gas. And oil, we're going to talk about electrification today. When it comes to cars and mobility, it's an oil game. And so when the lifeblood of modern civilization starts to look more like Space Mountain than It's a Small World, everybody loses their cool, because you can't run a country. You can't figure out which country is going to threaten you or go belly up. You can't plan monetary policy. You can't plan a budget. You can't keep your consumers happy if you have this wild volatility. And I think for the near term, I don't think we're going to see a new swing producer come in and be effective. There is OPEC plus. Saudi Arabia and Russia have gotten together, and it's like a Netflix series. Sometimes they're getting along, and like they are now, and things are pretty stable. And then when they don't, all heck breaks loose, as we've seen. So, but that's my first point, is that we are on Space Mountain, and it's really hard to run a society. It's hard to bake a cake on Space Mountain. Second point, getting to where we are now. These bust periods, Robbie mentioned 5 years, exactly right. So these periods of booms and busts tend to last about 5 to 7 years. And just before Mr. Putin thought it would be a good idea to launch the largest land war in Europe since World War II, the oil market was transitioning out of a bust period where prices go low. Consumers like that, $2 a gallon, $1.90 a gallon. Producers don't like that, but the consumers were happy. We didn't think much about gasoline in the last 5-7 years. But we were transitioning into a boom phase where, as a consequence of those many years of lower investment and increasing consumption. And if you look at the cars Americans have been buying since 2014, they are not getting more efficient. I don't care what the EPA rules say on paper, they're not. We have the data on that. But as we get into this multi-phase boom phase, this is going to be a problem for consumers. And it'll be a challenge for policymakers as well. I just hope that we'll be able to go back to what we saw a little bit under the Obama-Biden administration, $100 a barrel, where we had an all-the-above practical approach to energy policy. But my final point I'll just leave you with is Mr. Putin then decides to throw a grenade into the oil market as it's transitioning from a multi-year bust phase to a multi-year boom phase by risking, the most oil we've seen threatened in decades. Russia is the largest oil exporter, if you consider both crude oil, almost 5 million barrels a day, and then petroleum products like diesel and heating oil, almost 3 million barrels a day. And if you look at how much is threatened due to sanctioning and self-sanctioning, and I think we're in the early stages of this crisis that I was telling our colleagues before we came on, this is more like early 1942, where the Allies were still seeing blows come in and the crisis snowball. This is not 9/11, where we had an awful February 24th, and then we sort of work our way out of it. Or even the first Gulf War, when Saddam invaded in August of 1990, but then within a few weeks, we had stabilized the situation by putting troops in Saudi Arabia. This is where the crisis is still getting worse. So we have Russia, because of its atrocious actions, threatening the largest oil disruption in some time, next to an emergency reserve, if you will. And I'm talking about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I'm talking about the oil that Saudi Arabia and UAE are keeping in spare of only about 2.5 million barrels a day. So 8, or even threaten half of that, 4, is bigger than 2.5. So that's why oil prices have been rising so strongly. And as crude oil prices go, so go gasoline prices. The final point I'll make, and it probably comes up in the Q&A, I think one thing we're learning is it doesn't matter if we're self-sufficient in oil. We're a net exporter. It doesn't matter when it comes to whether our consumers are vulnerable to disruptions anywhere in the global oil market, because we all pay the same price for oil. Saudi Arabia does, Canada does, United States does, whether we net import, whether we net export. people in different countries impose taxes and subsidies that may adjust the price for consumers. We have fairly low taxes in the United States, but in terms of the gyrations up and down, we're all on the same roller coaster ride. So that's just a little bit of scene setting, and I look forward to our conversation about the policy consequences and implications of all this.
Thank you so much, Bob. I would tell our viewers that we released a paper today that you should get called Overcoming the Energy Security Mirage. Because as Bob laid out, we've been living in a mirage for a long time, and I think we've misdiagnosed the problem, and therefore we haven't adequately addressed the solutions. But let me now go to Admiral Howard. How would you think about the national and foreign policy implications of oil and gas in the context of what's going on now in the Ukraine?
Robbie, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and to be part of what's a pretty special panel and a chance to talk about the national security aspect of this. So my last job was as Naval Forces Europe and Africa, but I was also co-hatted as the 4-star operational commander for NATO for the southern aspect of the NATO countries. So my territories went from peacekeeping in the Western Balkans to training in Iraq that NATO members were doing for the Iraqi military. So pre-Ukraine, let's think about the dynamics within NATO. So NATO starts, 1948, 49, and it's all about countering communism and this threat from Stalin that he's basically going to try and take over Europe and make it a, communist is the way. And we as a country under Truman said, hey, no, we are going to create a security consortium. And so these cross-Atlantic ties have held. And so then after the Soviet Union fell, a little bit of warming up towards the Russian Federation. But in the end, I think most members of NATO understand Russia is, and as an autocratic nation, is a potential adversary. And that's playing out with what they're doing in Ukraine right now. And earlier, when you think about the first assaults into Ukraine, the attacks on Georgia and the cyber attacks in Estonia. The challenge is during that period where we had a little bit of warming towards Russia, many of our allies within NATO were happy to take Russian oil. And Bob's got it right. Our economies are beholden to energy. Everything we do, we can't do without electricity. And so then as we move forward and we start to back away from Russia again and start to think about them in terms of a potential adversary, the challenge is on the political side, it's hard to get to a unity and consensus on what to do next, even in a small countering, because so many of the members of NATO are beholden to Russia for their energy source. And so now that we've got this war in Ukraine, it's forced some of them to go, okay, that, we should never place ourselves in a position where we are economically vulnerable to Russia. Right, whether it's the Russian Federation or the Soviet Union, there's a history there of a willingness to use the economy and energy as a tool to get their way. And so now we're watching while some of these members are rethinking this relationship, this oil relationship with Russia, but there's not a lot of alternatives. And so where I think we ought to go in national security, there is this great article too in the NATO Charter, which talks about other aspects, not just, being together as a security agency, as a security consortium, and then being willing to fight together if one nation's attacked. There's economic opportunity within Article 2. And if you look at the Eastern Med, there are NATO allies who have untapped energy reserves in the Eastern Med. And so literally, when you look at the capacity of some of the NATO members, whether it's Germany, engineering capacity and development capacity, within NATO, this crisis should get us to rethink those relationships and look at helping some of the member nations develop their energy sources. And you think about the Black Sea. When I was a commander and I was visiting Bulgaria and Romania, who are stalwart members of NATO, those folks were telling me they were already being pressured. And this is the 2014, 2015, 2016 timeframe. They were already being pressured by Russia, almost coerced, to give away their energy reserves and let the Russian Federation develop it for them. And one of those classic, almost Chinese relationships. Hey, we'll come in and develop your oil for you, and what you're going to get on the dollar is almost nothing. We develop it, we sell it, and you bait the, it's like making a business deal with the mafia. You're dealing with Russia. So the pressures are there on these countries to work with Russia. And so within NATO, we have an opportunity to use this crisis, focus on getting us out of dependence of Russia, and then strengthening the alliance by strengthening the codependencies within the alliance.
Thank you so much, Admiral Howard, for that tour de force on the security implications. First of all, I want to remind people they can submit questions in the chat, and you can start submitting them, and I'll get to them in a little bit. I would remind, we have to think broader than Russia. I mean, the truth is, we're dependent, on oil. In Europe, it's also natural gas. If you look at, as I said before, the top, 6 producers, you're talking about Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Nigeria, Venezuela. I mean, really, there's something called the oil curse, and we've been cursed on one side and cursed on the other side. And with OPEC, as you said, Bob, it would be one thing if they were good at managing the market, but sadly, they've proven themselves not willing to manage the market. When push comes to shove, I guess the Saudis have told us to shove. So to me, at this point, we really have to find these long-term solutions. Bob, do you have hope that this is such a shocking event that actually people will fall? So first of all, you've diagnosed the problem, which we agree is volatility. You can't drill your way out of it. Yes, you need resources, but ultimately, you need to find a way to have a different lifeblood. Do you think one is we will begin to diagnose the problem well, and then that we can find unanimity between even Democrats and Republicans to find the short-term and the long-term solutions needed, or is this just deja vu all over again?
Well, thank you, Robbie. I think it's going to be perhaps another Netflix series. It's going to be very dramatic and tumultuous. Just setting aside energy, I think you don't have to be a Washington insider or political scientist to observe our country has become extremely polarized in the last couple decades. And the trend lines are towards more polarization about just about everything, from the sports we watch to the movies and everything else. So I have to say, from one perspective, you can be quite pessimistic. We'll agree on anything, much less how to balance our need to have affordable, secure energy today and respond to aggression like Putin's now, and then achieve our longer term goals. However, you got to be optimistic about human ingenuity and the human's ability and our country's ability, especially, to rise to the occasion, especially after a crisis. Crises, they're teachers. They force reconsideration, they force pragmatism, and so forth. And we've got young folks coming up who have been living now with a lot of volatility. And I think crises like this sort of require us that we get a little smarter, a little more pragmatic about the scale of the problems we face. And we hear about a lot about resource curse and oil's a curse and so forth. I think what folks are realizing now this winter, even before Putin's invasion and the move above $100 of oil, but even what was happening with oil and gas before that, was reminding us that what a blessing oil is. And now let's just face it. I mean, if you go from Moses to Harriet Tubman, so 5 millennia, the fastest a human being who wanted to travel on land could go was the speed of a healthy horse, or maybe a camel or something else that was domesticated. 5 millennia. And we transitioned to much faster mobility and all the other blessings that unlocked: agriculture, food, medicine, clothing, standard of living, lifespans doubled, fewer births, deaths at birth, everything. We've catapulted out of millennia of squalor because the United States and the UK had capitalistic systems that rewarded people to figure out technological innovations to solve human cravings. And actually, we were trying to solve illumination. We were even going for transportation. And so let's stop and remember, because Americans are realizing it now, what a blessing affordable energy of all kinds is, especially oil. Again, transportation, so important. And so we're getting knocked and mugged by reality now. Certainly the Biden administration is, certainly our public is, and the Congress and so forth. So I'm confident that reasonable, logical people, maybe not on the extremes of our parties and so forth, people who just want to, score political points and so forth. There's plenty of opportunity for both sides to do that. But I'm reasonably confident that after getting mugged by reality, and this is not over, this is not going to go away soon, I think you'll see people grope for a deeper understanding of the scale of our energy systems, what's really involved in terms of energy transitions and how long they take, what a blessing, but also a challenge, dependence on oil and gas and other fossil fuels is. And, after getting knocked around a little bit, Americans are going to come together and I think, get through it and come with policy to get through it. I think the way to get through it is through technological innovation. Because remember, after that period of Moses to Harriet Tubman, oil, alcohol, and electricity were all in strong competition for the transportation fuel. There were more electric cars initially than oil cars. Oil won out for lots of reasons, but it's not for want of trying for electric cars or for alcohol, ethanol for that matter. And in a way, we've been grappling with this for 120 years. And so it may be that we're at the precipice where the battery costs are going to come down low enough, and the cost of these cars and the infrastructure build out will come such that, we're going to see finally a transition from oil to, let's hope, clean electricity. Maybe. But let's be mindful of the scale of that challenge. And again, that challenge 120 years ago didn't come because the government decided on peak horse policy or anything like that. The government had absolutely nothing to do with it. It was innovators, brilliant people inventing new technologies, enabling us to unlock energy resources, and then the prime movers, the equipment that use them. And I think there's probably someone in their 20s or 30s who's going to figure out, it may be electricity, it may be fusion, it may be a safe way to extract methane hydrates. I'm not smart enough to know what it is, but I got to be optimistic that after getting mugged by reality over and over here, we're going to figure it out.
Thank you. Admiral Howard, you're a member of our Energy Security Leadership Council. Electrification, you heard about electric vehicles from Bob, has been, top of an agenda item for us. Like, why do you see, or why are you willing to support electrification and other forms of fuel? What is that makes it an important national security tool?
Robbie, so, we're vulnerable if we're dependent on a single energy source. And, there is no reason we need to give sticks to potential adversaries. We just need to get out of that and be as self-sufficient as we can be, whether it's rare earth minerals, or if it's fossil fuel, or if it's natural gas. We are a stronger nation if we're not reliant on anybody else. But there's this other aspect. And although Bob says, hey, really, it wasn't our governments that got us to where we are today, with energy and electricity. We got to remember, it's the government that gave that opportunity to every citizen. Where I live in a small town of 44 people, we are still using the co-op that was established under FDR. That this distribution of this opportunity, whether it's oil or electricity, that happens through the government. And that's important. So if we say, hey, we want to be self-reliant, well, we want to be self-reliant. We don't want to end up in a world where the tractors that, get us our food are still fossil fuel dependent. That we need to distribute this opportunity of electrification throughout all aspects of America. That's probably only going to happen through the government and through this infrastructure bill. And it's the logistics. And something as small as this, when we were running out of truck drivers in America, I was not getting mail delivered to my mailbox because the only fossil fuel gas station could not get fuel delivered from the big cities. You know, the only gas station within 50 miles of our house, which meant the local post office couldn't fuel their trucks. And so I'm not the only one who wasn't getting mail because of a logistics shortage. And then think about it, if the post office had an electric fleet and we had electric hookups out here across the nation, we still would have gotten mail. And it's everything else that runs on energy, that there's less likely to be disruptions if we can get away from a single energy source in transportation, in all of the different logistics. It's just better for America. Increases our reliability and makes us a stronger nation.
Yeah, as I like to say, electrification is great because electricity is domestic, diverse, and very stable in price and doesn't have the volatility as Bob pointed out initially. And that volatility is actually core to our to this dependence. I guess, Bob, would you say that at this moment, because we're already suffering, some of these impacts, and as you say, it's going to get worse, that we need to think about this as sort of like pulling off a Band-Aid? It's going to be really painful, but we got to pull the Band-Aid off once and for all, and this is our moment.
Well, I don't get invited to parties much. I'm not Mr. Optimistic all the time. I just am I served 2.5 years in the White House and then 2.5 years in Senegal, West Africa. But for most of my 32 years, it's not 29. I got to update you there, Robbie, as I'm getting older. But in my 32 years, most of it has just been a barrel counter and trying to predict and analyze things. And the way I see the oil market, again, before Mr. Putin decided to launch this war, we were transitioning into a multi-year boom phase that would take us well into $100 a barrel. And that's just the laws of supply and demand. And no Congress, no government is powerful enough to suspend the laws of supply and demand. And so I fear that we were entering into a boom phase. But you look back, I think, again, we had $100 barrel oil from 2010 to 2014. That was a shocker. That was the first big boom phase. You had President Obama with a pretty balanced policy. He, in what was perhaps the last great bipartisan energy policy achievement, got rid of archaic bans on crude oil exports, liberalized natural gas exports so we could help our allies. That administration understood what a strategic priority. I'm sure the Admiral mentioned the resources in the Med is absolutely correct. But also our ability, we're now the largest LNG exporter and sending every boat we can to Europe, thank God. Lithuania just got off of all Russian oil because they have an FSRU taking in LNG cargoes. So, and President Obama, to his credit, looked at developing the offshore, looked at nuclear power. It was a balance along with climate change and other renewables and so forth. So, we could do both. But unfortunately, at least so far anyway, we enter this new crisis era more polarized. And I'm just hoping that as this crisis endures, unfortunately, the silver lining might be we come to our senses, get smarter about energy, understand the scale and scope of things and how long and how costly transitions are, and maybe come back to a more balanced, pragmatic approach. We can do climate policy, we can do smart innovation and decarbonization policy at the same time that we stop making mistakes and do the right thing in terms of our energy security. And I would put on the list, banning Keystone. As you all saw the Wall Street Journal article today, President Biden is now hoping to increase imports from Canada, but not willing to support Keystone XL. I have nothing else to add to that. Draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. When we left the Bush administration, it was well over 700 million barrels at its then maximum capacity. In a case of bipartisan folly, and both parties are equally responsible, Congress has been selling that off for non-emergency expenses, thinking, what, we're independent, we don't need it. We have shale, we don't need it. Prices are low, we don't need it. But when the Iranians attacked Abqaiq, the largest and most important oil facility in the world, President Trump didn't promise to unleash shale. He promised to unleash the SPR. And we've seen President Biden use the SPR 3 times, once late last year and twice this year. And on the course of where we're going, we're at about 568 million barrels. President's going to sell another 160. And we've already mandated through Congress another 250 some odd million barrels. We'll be at the lowest we've been ever, well, around 140 million barrels, stripping away our protection against supply interruptions. So I'm hopeful that as we, and I think a lot of bipartisan folks, energy experts, kind of see a lot of things similarly. And I'm just hopeful that as we get deeper into this crisis, people are going to reconsider and come back to more sensible policies.
Admiral Howard, you know, as I use the Band-Aid analogy, do you, and earlier Bob said it's going to get much worse and maybe we don't even have a choice what we're going to do. But do you believe we should have more aggressive sanctions, that we should really push the Europeans, despite their energy dependence, to sort of cut the cord now, really starve the beast, and really just get on with this? Or do you think we have to be more measured in that approach?
Oh, tomorrow is now. Oh, and Eleanor Roosevelt, tomorrow is now. And if we don't start now in this crisis, eventually the crisis will be over and we'll go back to old habits. That's just human nature. And there's some other aspects. I mean, one of the things we kind of forget in all of this, you know, particularly these are private commercial companies, right? They're grabbing this energy, selling it, and so there's this business model aspect for them. So then when we're talking about volatile fuel prices, you know, when Saudi Arabia drops the price to punish Russia, or did they drop the price to drive shale out of business and fracking out of business? Because all of a sudden, the business model doesn't work anymore. The price of oil is so low, you can't make a profit. And so if this is all commercial, then the longer we're dependent and the prices go up and down, then our inability to move forward to get, you know, to have the company stay in business and continue to develop. And so we're obligated to say, hey, whether it's us or these other countries, yes, we've got to pressure Russia. And then we've got to use this to take the opportunity to start developing our internal resources and the infrastructure and the distribution. And then even then, there's this long-term piece to it. You know, it's very easy for us to go, oh, we're good for 100 years, you know, and I've read so many different studies. You know, how long is fossil fuel going to last? Well, that depends, because depends on what the consumption is. We develop new techniques. All I can say is the deeper we drill and the more techniques we develop, that just adds to the cost. But someday, not for us or our grandchildren or great-great-great-grandchildren, do we want to say, okay, at some point, when maybe we have exhausted the fossil fuel path, do we want to be in a position where we don't care? We've got renewable energy, we've got other energy sources, we've set the country up for continued strength in the future.
Great, thank you so much for that. I know that you have a passion for cybersecurity, and I guess I'd ask you, are you surprised that we haven't seen any retaliation? And do you believe that could be coming, or there's something maybe we maybe over gave too much credit to what Russia can do?
No, I don't think we gave too much credit what Russia can do. I mean, SolarWinds should have been, you know, a wake-up call for a lot of people if it wasn't. And I mean, you know, clearly the cybersecurity czar said, hey, we need to batten down the digital hatches as Russia was going into Ukraine, and certainly expect, particularly as private companies are taking actions, they should expect Russia to push back. I just, you know, how much does Russia want, and how much in how many different domains does Russia want to take on the rest of the world? Clearly, the military has to stay focused on Ukraine, and that's from every aspect, whether it's sea, air, land, or cyber. But President Putin is a man who's got a long memory and is keen on carrying a grudge. So when we're through this, maybe that's when we need to batten down the digital hatches.
Yeah, I've been slowly taking money out of the bank just in case, that ever happens. So I remind people about questions, but we have a question from George. Hopefully I pronounced this right. Hopefully, might be come up on the bottom of our screen. New technology we're using. But basically the question is, will there be a Biden goes to Riyadh moment? Let me turn to you, Bob.
I don't know that the president himself will go to Riyadh, but I think the administration is, boy, they're trying to find a way to, let's call it warm up the frozen relations between the White House and Riyadh. And it's a difficult problem for them because of, the differences. The killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the war in Yemen are controversial issues, and it's difficult for the president, especially a Democratic president, to do that. So, but again, President Biden has been mugged by reality this winter. And he has learned, if he didn't know it before, just how important Saudi Arabia is, in the short term anyway, in terms of its control of something that normally doesn't exist, readily producible oil. Roughly 2 million barrels a day or so of it. And so, and I think there's a concern about peeling away Saudi Arabia and the UAE from a closer orbit with Russia, and for that matter, China. So I think they're going to try and find ways to come closer. I'm not sure the Air Force One lands in Riyadh necessarily, but I think when you look at the war in Yemen, Iran, the Saudi concerns about the missile attacks from Houthis, on their oil facilities and other things, and of course isolating Putin and inflicting damage on him, as well as doing more to stabilize the global oil market. I think the administration has a real incentive there. And yes, I think folks in the White House, I think there's folks primarily concerned with national security and energy security. And even before the invasion of Russia's invasion of Putin, we're urging the president to come closer to Riyadh. After all, before Putin launched this war, the president talked with him. Putin has launched chemical weapons attacks on NATO ally soil to kill dissidents. We talked to Xi Jinping. He runs concentration camps. And so President Trump talked to Kim Jong-un, who blows up people with anti-aircraft weapons. So we deal with all different kinds of folks because our vital national interests are at stake, whether or not we approve of everything they do at home and whether or not they share our democratic values and human rights. So, and I think again, this winter's been a wake-up call. And I don't know about Air Force One to Riyadh, but I think the administration is trying to find ways to, it's more than just oil, but it's to put the U.S.-Saudi relations on a little surer footing.
I got another question, which is, what do you think the chances of actually in that region having an issue with Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and everyone else, which then just adds to the overall problems we have now? I guess I could go to Admiral Howard first, and Bob might have some thoughts as well.
So Robbie, during my time, and it's being quietly done, certainly seeing outreach and more normalization of political relationships between Israel and all of those countries that were mentioned. More quietly done is this Israel working with Greece on development of energy reserves, more quietly done. Israel looking with Egypt to quietly develop energy reserves off their common areas, off their shores. And so I think because all of that has stayed a lot underneath the radar, right now, when I look at where I left off and even where they are right now, I just don't see any desire on the part of those Middle Eastern countries to try and say, oh, well, this is a great opportunity to get after Israel. And Israel has
or how about to get after Iran?
To get after Iran?
Yeah, like all those countries together created.
Yeah, I think right now, because of Russia's relationship and mischief in that part of the world, I'm not sure that anybody would think what's the outcome you're trying to achieve, and do you think you're gonna get it just because Russia has started this war in Ukraine and is distracted? I would say, I don't think anybody would think that's necessarily a great opportunity to get to an outcome you want.
Bob, do you have any thoughts on how you see the risk profile of the Iranian deal and reaction to it?
Yeah, I think it's bigger than the Iranian deal. Whether there will be one or not, Iran is going to remain very close to a breakout capability. But again, if we step back, we are in a snowballing military contest with Iran, and I mean Iran against its Gulf Sunni neighbors and Israel. Iran used precision-guided weapons to attack, what I think is literally the most valuable piece of real estate on planet Earth, the Abqaiq stabilization plant, in September 2019. They decided to inflict light and reversible damage. So they left a calling card and made their point. It was sort of shots across the bow. But they could do that again. And the Houthis have been trying to attack and in some cases succeeding these oil facilities. Meanwhile, Israel, we assume, perhaps with the help of other countries, is launching attacks against Iranian forces in Syria and Iran proper. And we all read about the assassinations, the cyber attacks. Thank God the successful cyber attacks, at least for a while, successful on the Iranian nuclear program, Olympic Games, et cetera. So I think everyone sort of focuses on the day that Israel sends the jets after Natanz. We can talk about that in a second. But if we just look out, we're seeing a steady increase in conflict and confrontation both ways between Iran and its neighbors. And I don't see that going away anytime soon, as long as Iran has this type of regime in place. Now, with regard to Israel sort of, doing a sort of an overt conventional attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, and perhaps, it would always be easier to do that if you had at least the tacit, if not overt, cooperation of local Sunni countries. That's a lot easier to do it if you're going to do that kind of operation. The Admiral would know much more about this than I. But I would think Israel would have to have pretty good evidence that not only was detecting a breakout, so Iran was actually trying to weaponize, but that it had the ability to set it back with the means that are available. And I'm not a military expert. I think in some cases, our best opportunities to set the Iranian nuclear program have come and gone. And we're in a very difficult situation. I tell folks the only thing worse than a preemptive attack on Iran's nuclear facilities is no preemptive attack on Iran's nuclear facilities and a nuclear armed Iran. And if we think about mutually assured destruction and everybody's starting to get into what we do in sort of MAD, right? You declare your red lines, you demonstrate your forces, everyone starts testing in that region with those short flight times. I almost think that's going to be much more difficult. So it's a grave situation, I'm afraid.
So we have a few minutes left. We have a question from Michael Moore, and it could be the celebrity, might not be the celebrity, but we'll ask the question anyways, because anyone named Michael Moore deserves to ask. In one word or one number, Bob, what is the price of demand destruction where people stop, where we start seeing oil demand go down due to the high price?
The one number is annual average $150 Brent. That is what Rapidan Energy Group's team has modeled. But I have to, but, that is an estimate in an economic model that assumes an otherwise sunny macroeconomic and geopolitical conditions. That's sort of steady state going along. The price just goes that high. That's when oil expenditures get to about 5% of GDP. So that's what we say there. I would just caution, as we are in anything but sunny weather right now, emerging from COVID, central banks raising rates, largest land war since World War II, all kinds of risk and inflationary pressures. So I wouldn't bet the farm on $150 a barrel per se, but that is our number.
The second question from Michael Moore, the movie maker, is Admiral Howard, do you believe that this war will expand beyond the borders of Ukraine?
Right now, no. So when you look at it from Putin's perspective, even though NATO has not necessarily call out the lines, I mean, if we're looking at where could he go, he's not going to deliberately cross that Article 5 line right now. He just does not want to do that. And so then could it possibly, could he suck Belarus in and everybody? He could, but I think those folks are going to be hesitant because they're going to be worried, they're on the losing side and this may not turn out well. But right now, no, I think he's going to have to, we're watching, he's going to have to retrench and rethink. I don't think he's given up. These are guys who were in Chechnya for years. They were in Afghanistan for decades. They might retrench, but they're not going to stop. But no, they're not going to expand either.
So let me ask the last question, and then I will summarize. I'm going to take a moment to talk about our new paper. The question is, do you believe that Europe will ultimately either ban energy coming from Russia, both oil and gas? How long will that take for them to do this? And then or do you believe that Russia in some ways will cut them off, causing that type of hardship, of course, on both sides of that equation, the money they won't get and the energy that Europe won't have? Bob, why don't we start with you?
All right, tough predictions. On the natural gas side, it would appear that Putin may be serious about demanding ruble payments for gas. That's another way of just embargoing, because the customers can't do that. Even if they wanted to buy the rubles and give it to them, you'd be violating sanctions by doing that. So I think, and so I think there's a good chance we'll see at least a temporary disruption in Russian gas exports. Again, this situation is snowballing, and the atrocities we're seeing in Ukraine right now are just going to add to it. And the European Union is going to come in with sanctions. I think when it comes to coal, it looks like the EU is going to phase out Russian coal imports. And that's almost half of Europe's coal comes from Russia. So that's quite a bit. On oil, I think it's going to be more gradual. The countries that are on the end of the Druzhba pipe, the big pipeline built in the Soviet times to connect the then Soviet Union to its then satellite countries, the GDR, Germany, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, they really can't afford to just ban it because they don't have really no other way to replace it. And so I think you'll probably see over time phased in reductions and so forth with those countries. Hungary is almost siding with Russia. I hate to say it, is almost not even being that helpful here as a NATO ally. And so and their president was just overwhelmingly reelected. So I don't think, and one country in Europe can block sanctions. So I don't think you'll see a wholesale ban like you saw in the United States, which only imported a tiny amount of oil from Russia. So no, but I think sporadic temporary outages, Russia banning gas for a while, I think is unfortunately somewhat likely. And then phased in reductions in banning and sanctioning of oil is also likely, but it'll be a gradual process. The final thing I'll say is, you saw this with Iran and Venezuela sanctions and Libya sanctions. Even if the governments don't directly sanction the oil or the exports, ancillary sanctions on banks and shipping firms, even if they try to have an exemption for energy. And the Biden administration tried to do this in the beginning. They said, we don't want to sanction energy. Nevertheless, these companies that do this trading are very risk averse, and they will what we call self-sanction and step back. So one way or the other, we estimate at least some 3 million barrels a day of Russia's 8 million barrels a day is going to get shut in Russia due to sanctioning.
Admiral Howard, very quickly, do you think it will be a sanction of choice by us or by Putin?
Oh gosh, I think Putin realizes he's got to sell the oil to someone. And then so the question is, can he get another customer, China, to, and then if he can get another customer who can absorb that amount of oil, then he'll be great. I don't need to sell to Europe. I've got my one good pal and customer. So that's why I think in all of this, and Bob alluded to this, we've got to be looking at some of the other global players, particularly China, because China can give Russia the out in terms of economy that would allow them to keep going with the war.
So let me finish the conversation today by just once again noting that we put out a paper called Overcoming the Energy Security Mirage. Please look at our website, secureenergy.org. And really, we lay out a case, as Bob did in the beginning, of why we've always misunderstood our oil dependence, why the ultimate solution is to get off oil as a single fuel source through electrification, and that we need to accelerate that transition. But in the meantime, we call for other things to happen as well. One is the president meeting with the National Petroleum Council, which would be extraordinary. But really important to bring all the players together. Two is to, yes, use oil from our strategic petroleum reserve, but just as quickly refill it up using tools like the Defense Production Act to accelerate the oil that many oil companies might be sitting on or can't get equipment to bring out of the ground, and the government can help get that equipment. Three, to continue to work with our European allies, both on the supply and the demand side, with natural gas, and then finally to work on these supply chain issues broadly when it comes to electrification, not to become dependent on China, but just look at some of the resources we do get from Russia, whether it be neon, which 40+% comes from Mariupol, which is used to make semiconductors, or aluminum or palladium for our catalytic converters. And the nickel that we'll need in our batteries, and that we need to set up a policy now in the United States to get all these resources now, and we shouldn't wait. So we think that these 6 steps are a way of thinking about the short term, but ultimately focusing on this long term to get away from oil as a single fuel source. Really, we had in World War II an arsenal of democracy, working with our European allies, a transatlantic partnership to end World War II. And in this situation, probably we need an arsenal of energy, bringing all the energy technology at our disposal. And right now we have that. We have all this technology, whether it be the batteries of today, some of the production and techniques that we can use. So we can do this now. It's really a matter of will, thinking about the short term, long term. And as we'll end with what Representative Crow said, this is a win-win-win. We can have our energy security, we can have our economic security and jobs, and finally we can do this in a clean way that works towards a less emitting world. But we just have to get serious about it, and hopefully you'll go to our website, join our cause, as we continue to promote these types of policies. So thank you, Admiral Howard. Thank you, Bob McNally, and thank you, Representative Crow, for being with us today. I look forward to working with you on these issues.